incapable of coping with a substantial terrorist incident. And you don't have to take credit for it. In fact, it'd be counterproductive to take credit for it.
Let me just add to that, if I can. There are several hundred bombings in the United States every year. I can't remember whether it was 500 last year approximately. So we do have a problem with bombings in this country, and the majority of those are in labor disputes and in disgruntled employees, people who have a particular problem with someone else. And a small number of those might have a political tinge to them. We've had, again, racist, anti-Semitic groups that have left bombs and targeted various victims in this country. But this has different fingerprints. It has different hallmarks. And I would just disagree slightly with my colleagues. I think that money is the mother's milk of terrorism in a lot of ways, and that most terrorist episodes we find have a fairly substantial investment into the logistics, into the everything that's required, not just the explosive. And I would submit, too, that if, since no one's missing this explosive at this point, and it may indeed be an improvised explosive, but it may indeed, if it were anything from dynamite to plastic, in my experience, it has been you could get a small amount relatively cheaply, but a large amount costs you a lot of money. And it's relatively difficult, at least in my judgment and experience, to do.
Does this, does it appear to be dynamite to you?
I can't say at this point. It's got a nitrate base to it. It could be dynamite, and certainly, one of the detonators to this could have been dynamite, which could have detonated ammonium nitrate or any other mixture like that. And they're going to discover that, and they're going to be able to tell us exactly very, very soon.
I see a lot of C4. I think it's a plastic explosive that you see in a lot of movies and stuff like that.
That's several orders of magnitude more energetic.
Sir?
It's an order of magnitude more energetic as an explosive.
It's more energetic than dynamite?
Yes.
So it means a smaller quantity of it will do more damage?
That's right.
I think you have to keep in mind when you're talking about a car bomb, a car bomb is simply a means of delivering a larger quantity of explosives than a person can carry.
Yeah.
The issue in a car bomb is not quality. The issue in a car bomb is quantity.
Yeah.
And in that respect, it may be easier to assemble a large car bomb than some type of very destructive device that would be small enough to be concealable. Mm-hmm. Because you're dealing with quantity of that sort, the bombers, whatever their motives, do not have to resort to some of the more exotic, some of the more difficult to get explosives. People think that if it's terrorists, it must be C4, plastic explosives, Semtex, anything in that category. That is not so. The fact is car bombings around the world are carried out with dynamite. They're carried out with mixtures of fertilizers and fuel oils. They use relatively crude explosives because the quantities involved provide the tremendous explosive force of it, and they don't have to be that skilled. I'm not saying these aren't skilled bombers. I'm saying that the device itself does not require some of the more sophisticated things that we've seen in the history of terrorism.
One of the things that makes it a little bit more sophisticated, though, Brian, is the requirement the firing mechanism has got to be much more sophisticated when you're dealing with a crude explosive.
That's what I was going to ask. Chairman will permit me one more question. I realize I'm over my time, but I'm asking some questions I realize before you all have the answers, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot kind of globally, because when I learn from the media or wherever about what kind of explosives, what you're telling me will help put some pieces together, at least in my mind. And that was the next question, Dr. Kupperman, is how do you detonate something like that? I know that there are a variety of detonation, but it seemed to me one thing that one would want to consider, and I try to always put myself in someone else's place, is how dangerous would it be to get the thing there without, with a car accident or something like that on the way, have done it. In other words, I want to know how much risk was involved in the person. What was their mindset? Did they not care about their own life, or was it their design to kind of park it? And then could you detonate it from a distance with a timer, or some other kind of device is what I mean, and I realize I'm groping because you don't know.
It's all of the above.
Sir?
It's all of the above. I can imagine errors that they make in the design that would make it especially sensitive to shock, particularly if the explosives were homemade.
Car bombs do go off on the way to the intended target. Often when they do, we sometimes puzzle about what the intended target might have been because we don't know it went off in the wrong place, wrong time. Insofar as detonating a car bomb, yes, the challenge is to get all the explosives to blow up. But that could be done with some type of remote device, the simplest one being a timer. And that basically is an alarm clock and a battery.
And all those are clues that eventually will be sifted through and found, pieces of which will, at some point you suspect that we'll be able, that the FBI and ATF and the other agencies involved will be able to determine what detonated, not only what kind of explosives were used, but what kind of detonator was used.
Forensically, they're just superb. I mean, the ATF and FBI and the New York PD are really superb analysts of these things, and there's no question in my mind they're going to be able to virtually reconstruct the bomb.
An investigation of this type, I mean, what you have at the beginning as givens are what, when, and where. You know that.
Right.
The investigation determines how.
Right.
If you
And
are
who?
fortunate, in this case, very quickly, has identified at least the suspect regarding who.
Right.
Often the last thing we know is why.
Right.
And especially in this case, because it is not entirely clear what the specific purpose or message is.
Right.
These people have been better bombers than they have been communicators, but we don't know the details. Eventually, we hope to find that out as well.
Let me just say there's one advantage to this investigation, too. If you remember Pan Am 103, by comparison, the wreckage was strewn over 600 to 800 square miles, yet they found a tiny fragment of a detonator that they were able to trace back to a Swiss manufacturer that had sold that to Libyans. In this particular case, it is still it's a relatively contained, albeit there's 25 tons of debris or what have you, but they're going to sift through that and very, very carefully look at every piece and every grain of sand that comes out of there.
You think there's someone made the reference, and I believe it was just obliquely for the purpose of comparison, in the earlier panel, any remotely related relationship between this bombing incident and the shootings out at the CIA headquarters?
I have no knowledge of any relationship. I mean, it's...
I mean, bombers and shooters are kind of two different categories, like cat burglars and people that break in with cars. I mean, that burglarize by breaking in a place with a car is kind of a crude way of doing things, as opposed to a cat burglar that kind of figures out and uses techniques with a safe, you know, all that kind of...
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, again, if you look at the history of terrorist groups, they have done used a repertoire of tactics. And the same group may be involved in bombings, it may be involved in kidnappings and assassinations,
Right.
a variety of tactics. So that we can't say because one was one set of tactics and another was another set of tactics that there is no relationship. And we cannot disprove a relationship at this time, but that's trying to prove a negative. The
Right.
only thing that relates them, insofar as I know, is coincidence in time. There is no other information, at least that I have, that suggests that the two are connected.
I think that's right.
It'd be fair to say, in concluding, that all of you would be surprised if there were some connection.
I would be.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And let me first ask thank the panel for their work here. Let me ask you first about the question that I tried to ask the director about, and I don't know why he was so close-mouthed, and that is about Hamas, which is today, in fact, Assistant Secretary Jerigian announced it will be, as has been stated earlier, they'll be on the terrorist list. What do you know about Hamas in this country? And do you think, well, tell me what you think, if any, is the relationship between Hamas and what happened at the World Trade Center, if you feel free to comment on that.
Well,
Mr. Livingston.
if you'd like me to start, the people I talk to here and abroad believe that at least since the Palestinians were deported or expelled from Israel into Lebanon, that at that time there was a shift of activity to the United States, and that a substantial part of Hamas's operations have been directed from the United States and via various ring downs and so on through phones in Europe and so on that they can use to transmit messages, direction, and as we know with the arrest of an American citizen in Israel, even money. And so insurrections, and Hamas is basically at the forefront of an insurrection, are very difficult things to keep moving all in one direction. And so they take a lot of organization, a lot of effort. And it appears that we have neutral territory for them right now to operate.
Was it too neutral?
As you probably recall, sir, early in the Reagan administration, a four-bill package was sent up to Congress. Three of them were passed, and one bill was not passed, the so-called and infamous Ed Wilson bill, which said that no American citizen should be allowed to support foreign terrorist groups. Well, it was probably rather clumsily drafted, and possibly should have not been passed in that form, because the issue was raised: who gets to decide who's a terrorist group and who isn't? Is the ANC a terrorist group, as some suggested at that time? Is Hamas a terrorist group? So on and so forth. But I tend to think that we have become increasingly a neutral venue for terrorists, at least to operate here. I think if they now foreign terrorists, if this investigation suggests that foreign terrorists were indeed involved in this, then I think that's a departure. They have not fouled their nest here heretofore.
Mr. Jenkins.
I've read the reports that Hamas has a presence in the United States. I'm not sure exactly what we should do with that. Insofar as I know, the laws of the United States do not punish you for being a member of something or for sympathizing with a cause, for printing posters, engaging in political activities on behalf of that cause. We don't have association laws in this country,
right,
that make association with certain elements a criminal offense. And therefore, it is always very, very difficult for us to deal with this phenomenon. There are many conflicts going on in many parts of the world where Americans have taken strong positions, have raised funds on behalf of those causes, have engaged in propaganda activities on behalf of those causes, make no secret of their support for those causes, and are in no violation of the law. The question is if they go further than that.
And that's the question I'm asking you based on your expertise.
Yeah. I have no knowledge that these groups have gone further than that. That would be a matter of current investigation, whether they actually have violated laws on the export of weapons, or have engaged in other activities that would in themselves be crimes regardless of their political affiliation.
Right, understood. Dr. Kupperman, you have a comment?
I have nothing to add to that. I have nothing to add.
Okay, let me ask you this. What do we make of the fact that the attack on the World Trade Center, there was no group that beforehand made a phone call? There doesn't seem to be a group now loudly and repeatedly taking credit for it. I know there were some, 19, and then I thought someone said even a higher number of calls immediately after. But that is usually not the MO of most of the terrorist organizations that commit these acts.
They're not taking credit for.
Are there a good number? Go ahead, Dr. Kupperman.
There are some. In fact, I was curious about that myself, and had some material pulled together on this particular thing. It turns out, if we look at the realm of international terrorism, that in the past 20-some years, We have 4,329 bombings worldwide that fall in the category of international terrorism.